Members, we're going to move to House File 613, Representative Pinto. And Representative Pinto, that was such a powerful and emotional moment for us that we did slow time down a bit. We're going to have to speed up time, perhaps unfortunately, but I think we can get in some good quality testimony on this bill and the next couple of bills as well. And Representative Pinto moves to refer House File 613 to the Committee on Ways and Means. Representative Pinto, your bill is before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't think I'm known for long bill presentations or speeches, and so I'll try to make sure to keep that up for these next two bills. Members, House File 613 is a proposal that actually was heard by this committee. I think it was a year ago, shortly before the pandemic kind of upended things. It's a collection of proposals, and I think what I'd like to do, there's a couple of handouts that I'd like to direct the committee's attention to, but then really just turn to our testifiers to describe the need for the bill and some of the details, and then we can go to questions. With your permission, Mr. Chair.
Very well. I'm sorry. Are we hearing that?
Oh,
I'm sorry,
Mr. Chair. I was following your directive to be so quick that I went out front of you. So, Mr. Chair, what I was saying is that I'm directing the committee's attention to a couple of handouts describing the bill, but really thought we could just move straight to testifiers to describe the need and the details.
Indeed. Thank you. The chair is the one who's slowing everything down here. Very well. We have Janelle Kendall from Stearns County. If you can come forward and give us your name for the record and provide us your testimony, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Representative Kendall for bringing this bill forward and for your work as a pioneer in this field. Representative Pinto, in his day job as a prosecutor, actually tried some of the first cases, and we have modeled much of our work after what he has to say. I also have here today with me Chief Dave Ventrude of the Waite Park Police Department, who is actually the person who came forward with the local task force and put this together from the beginning. And I have Ole Tweeten, the chief of the criminal division in the Stearns County Attorney's Office, with me today. With the chair's assent, may we have Chief Ventrude actually start our presentation.
Very well. Welcome, Chief Ventrude, to the committee. Please state your name for the record and give us your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Marion, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity. I will keep things as brief as I can. Dave Ventrude, I am police chief for the city of Waite Park, and my perspective on this is dealing with human trafficking, mostly sex trafficking, over the last 10 years. I would say the first 7 years was more mutual aid, multi-jurisdictional in nature, and doing it kind of part-time as cases developed. With support and funding from a state grant, we have been formally organized as a trafficking task force in central Minnesota. Our main contributors or participants is the Waite Park Police Department, the St. Cloud Police Department, the Stearns County Sheriff's Office, Janelle Kendall's office, the Stearns County Attorney's Office, our local sexual assault center, as well as Terabith Refuge. And so we have a very strong collaboration here. My career between St. Cloud PD and now Waite Park has been 30 years in central Minnesota. So I've seen this problem of human trafficking emerge kind of from the front row. And it's been a sad to see in many ways, but I am very gratified as to the collaborative nature of the work that we've been doing up in this area. In the course of that work, we have seen, again, a lot of good things going on. And I guess I would suffice it to say, if I was to look at what we're proposing and what we're asking you to consider, if you look at this as kind of a crime triangle, what we're proposing is addressing some legislative changes. Given the history of our work really over the last 10 years, we've identified some things that we think will help in our fight against human trafficking. That the triangle being that we're looking at some sanctions and consequences that impact those who engage in trafficking. We also think we have some proposals that will impact the demand side of the human trafficking problem. And we also believe we are bringing forward some solid recommendations that will impact the victim side, both adult and adolescent victims of human trafficking. So with that context, I will turn it back to Janelle to talk more specifically about what we're proposing and why.
Thank you, Chief Benchard, and thank you so much for the work that you've committed your heart and soul and the resources of your police community there to vitally, vitally important. Thank you. Ms. Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Janelle Kendall, I'm the Stearns County Attorney. As Chief Benchard said, for the last 3 years, we have been part of the Central Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force. During that time, we've received 333 tips through the first of this year. That involves investigations with thousands of pages of data. One of the primary ways that we prove up these cases of proving sex acts for money and for profit are through cell phone warrants, for example, massive data dumps, hotel receipts, surveillance. We cannot count on our victims to be carrying the weight of proof at trial. So for example, we have had buyers testify at trial to corroborate our victims and prove that a sex act for money took place. These are long and complicated trials. These are, as persons have testified at this hearing today, this is extremely, extremely difficult for victims to be found, then to choose to talk to law enforcement, then to choose to testify. There's a lot of steps involved here, but in our 3 years of experience, there are things the legislature can definitely do to help with us. We've had 25 traffickers charged in that 3-year period, 10 persons charged for soliciting children, and 80 buyers convicted just since the task force began. We did have numbers coming into that, and that was when we came to the legislature and asked for the intentional targeted approach that Chief Benchard talked about. We have a multidisciplinary team and approach to this. We have a data analyst to go through all those cell phone dumps, the Facebook pages, the instant messaging, a management level prosecutor, a case coordinator, and 2 full-time investigators. But it's not just about law enforcement and prosecution. We have legal aid lawyers at the table. We have Terebinth Refuge, one of the few adult shelters in the state of Minnesota. We have our sexual assault center. We have our healthcare system, Centricare, along with our child advocacy center and an entire mental health team assigned specifically to work with these victims. When the COVID slowed down our buyer stings, we turned our attention to massage parlor ordinances. St. Cloud and Waite Park had 11 massage parlors show up in about a 6-month period. And I tell you what, when you get the health inspectors on a team that knows what we know about trafficking and starts to pay attention to this from a civil regulatory, what's going on in that business. Those, I don't know if there's one of them left. Obviously, if the massage parlor is legitimate, awesome. But if it's a front for sex trafficking, we needed to know that, and we did find that to be true. So based on our experience, we have 3 areas of concern to submit to the legislature. Many of these trafficking laws were created 40 years ago, before everything was done by text and by email and instant messaging and Snapchat. So in the 3 areas, as Chief Benchard notes, we have 3 different focuses. First, let's talk about the traffickers. We have a Minnesota law that defines certain offenses as violent crimes. There's literally a specific list from the legislature saying, if you do this specific crime, for example, robbery, high-level drug sales, repeated assaults, that has a specific designation that if you keep doing those violent crimes and keep getting convicted of those, we can actually ask for a higher sentence than the Minnesota sentencing guidelines would suggest for that offense. And we have found that over half of the traffickers that we're working on here have criminal histories as long as your arm and would qualify for that. And we literally can't get the sentences up to where they should be because sex trafficking isn't considered a violent crime. So very simple fix for the legislature to add sex trafficking offenses to the list that count as violent crimes for that sentencing enhancement. And again, over half the traffickers charged so far in Stearns County have criminal history scores of on average 6, but from 4 to 10. And that means they've been repeatedly charged, convicted, sentenced, space, do it again, space, 4 to 10 times on violent crimes. So this is the type of offender that we are most likely seeing. So we ask that you add sex trafficking to the list of violent crimes. And at the same time, we've also found that we're getting statutory max sentences on these guys. We could actually get more if those people were considered violent criminals and if we can increase the statutory maximum. We have had a 25-year statutory maximum case. Representative Pinto has the dubious privilege of having seen people that were even worse than that. We need to move these statutory max sentences up, because right now, if you get a guideline sentence, you may be able to get more than the 15 or 20 or 25-year max, but as soon as you hit the maximum sentence, you're done. So we ask the legislature to please increase the statutory maximum for the sex trafficking felonies so that when the Minnesota sentencing guidelines call for more, we can get more. The second prong is, as the chief said, is dealing with demand. As originally written, when we talked about sex buyers in Minnesota, and this is how the law stands today, that if the arrangement to buy sex is made in a public place versus a private place, in a public place, it's a gross misdemeanor, but in a private place, it's a misdemeanor. Basically looking at trying to take trafficking off the streets versus eliminate it from the globe. So what we are seeing right now is that the Minnesota Court of Appeals got a case out of Candy, Ojai County, where the deal to buy sex had been made through texting and through cell phones. And not surprisingly, the Minnesota Court of Appeals said, well, that's a private place, so that can only be a misdemeanor. Since this arrangement wasn't made in a public place, but in the private place of someone's cell phone, that's just a misdemeanor. Let's fix that, please. Sex buying should be gross misdemeanor across the board. It doesn't matter to the victim where it is that this arrangement was made. Now that we know what we know about sex trafficking and the prevalence of this activity, we respectfully request that the legislature make those gross misdemeanors across the board. And additionally, and this created a lot of discussion with this group last year, we've caught some people multiple times. Right now, those might be multiple misdemeanors, maybe multiple gross misdemeanors. We ask the legislature to create a sentencing provision whereby if a person is caught and convicted more than once in 10 years, that we can treat that person as a felon. And there's increased ability to monitor those people. There are just more things that we can do with a felony level sentence on repeat sex buyers. Along those same lines, solicitation of children, where we have gotten to solicitation, we can't prove that there was actual conduct and that there was an actual assault, but we know for a fact and can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that persons are soliciting children. And I remind this committee, as we got to talk to you about last year, the demand is 3 times higher if the ad is placed for a person who is 15 years old of age or younger. So these are the really, really scary persons out there. Right now, that's only a 3-year felony. So if you don't have a significant criminal history, that's basically a little bit of jail time and 3 years of probation. And if you have a significant history, again, over half of the offenders we deal with, that's only 3 years in prison. We ask the legislature to please move that to 5. If a person does not have a history, we want to be able to monitor them for 5 years versus 3. And if they do have a significant history, let us put those persons in prison for 60 months versus the 36 that is the maximum right now. And finally, because we do have Terebinth Refuge, an adult shelter in our county, in fact, in Waite Park there with Chief Ventrud, we learned that trespassing at that facility is a misdemeanor, whereas trespassing at a domestic violence shelter is a gross misdemeanor. We came across that because we had it happen and realized that there's a specific designation for just those domestic violence shelters. We would ask that the legislature make that consistent and make it likewise a gross misdemeanor offense to harass or appear at or cause these kind of problems at trafficking victim shelters as well as DV shelters. We do have the support of the Minnesota County Attorneys Association on this bill. We have spent a lot of time with the Washington County Attorney's Office and the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, sharing and gaining expertise together. We do have a strong statewide situation that I know another of Representative Pinto's bills is designed to address. Once you really start to dig in and see the reality of these cases on a daily basis, we come back to the legislature to ask your assistance in these specific areas. And I'm sure this won't be the last you'll hear of us, but this is what we have identified that we can specifically ask the legislature for at this time.
Very well. Thank you, Ms. Kendall. A lot there and a lot of learning that's happened as a result of the work that you're all doing collaboratively that suggests offers to us a way for us to modernize our laws in order to meet the realities on the streets and close out those huge gaps that allow constant violators to violate. Representative Pinto, we do have two other testifiers. The clock is ticking. And so let me just ask if they're still testifying, if they can be as brief as possible. We have Oli Tvedden. I'm going to learn how to pronounce this name, and Carolyn Palmer. And so Mr. Tvedden from Stearns County Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Ole Tweeden, the Chief of the Criminal Division. We're happy to answer any questions. I see representatives with their hands raised, so I'd like to just cede my time now and be back if you have any questions.
Very well, thank you so much. And it's Tvedden?
Correct, thank you.
All right, very well, thank you, sir. And then Carolyn Palmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Caroline Palmer, and I am the Safe Harbor Director at the Minnesota Department of Health in the Injury and Violence Prevention section. Thank you so much, Representative Pinto, for introducing this bill and for your longstanding leadership in the response to human trafficking in our state. I'm here to inform the committee briefly about Safe Harbor's work. Over the past decade, and thanks to substantial investment and interest from the legislature, the Minnesota Safe Harbor program has expanded significantly in its reach to meet the needs of youth through age 24 who are survivors of human trafficking, and particularly sexual exploitation. We use grants, protocol development, training, and evaluation to achieve this goal. Over 700 youth have been served over the past 2 years, a number we expect to rise as our grantees complete their data inputs for this time period. According to research by the University of Minnesota School of Nursing, where they are analyzing Minnesota student survey data, at least 5,000 youth in the state from all regions have experienced some form of sexual exploitation. So the work of Safe Harbor's grantees in partnership with the criminal justice and child welfare systems is critical to meeting the health and safety needs of young people. I will be adding information to some of the other bills on the agenda today as well. For the present bill, I would just like to address in particular the section about trespassing on shelter property where trafficking victims are housed. Last summer, a Safe Harbor shelter program had an individual who over the course of 3 days checked the building doors to attempt to gain access to a victim resident who he had exploited. The police were asked to sit in the parking lot when possible, and the program director also sat in the parking lot during shift changes at night to ensure staff could access their cars safely. Thankfully, staff and residents remain safe, but this is unfortunately an infrequent but serious issue for the youth striving to break free from exploitation and for the grantee programs providing services. Thank you, and I am very happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you so much, Ms. Palmer. There are 3 questions. We'll do those 3 and then we'll move on from there. Representative O'Neill, Representative Rowley, and Representative Johnson. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question for Representative Pinto. Just because we heard Representative Muller's bill yesterday that would change, especially the ages on the crim sex statutes, and I'm just wondering, have you looked at what you're changing and what Representative Muller is proposing to change, and how the two play together, and then also how this works with current federal law? I'm just trying to piece everything together, Representative Pinto, if you could help us with that.
Good question, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative O'Neill. Great questions. I might actually, so I guess I'll note that the County Attorneys Association has endorsed both the proposals we heard yesterday and then this proposal today, and so it should be that they work together well. But I might actually just see if one of our, although I am a prosecutor, as you know, I'm part-time these days because I'm working with you and everybody else. So I might actually turn to the full-time experts to see if they could weigh in on your questions.
Ms. Kendall, perhaps? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Ole Tweeden again. Representative O'Neill, I'll try and answer the question as best I can in terms of the federal law component. It would not change the ability or capacity for us to prosecute cases federally. There are certain parameters in the federal law that you have to meet to prove up a sex trafficking case that are not required in Minnesota. So this wouldn't necessarily change the amount of federal or state cases you have. They do work hand in hand, and with task forces around the state, we are in constant communication on cases that may have some federal legs to them. As to if the question is related to the other components of the federal law, including the state law, including demand, we don't see many federal prosecutions on the demand side, and I don't know that there are any. This just ties together that what we're seeing in phones, in communications, in meeting with Johns, that if you've done this once, you should have known it was wrong at first, but if you do it again, you need a stiffer consequence. And so that would be probably the maximum sentence you could find would be those felonies for the Johns if they repeat it twice in 10 years. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Tweeden. Representative O'Neill?
Yes, I was just wondering if Representative Pinto sees any, I mean, obviously there's correlation between Representative Muller's bill yesterday and his bill today. And maybe they work really well together. I'm wondering if he has any thoughts about that, and then I'm done.
Very well. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative O'Neill. I needed sort of a minute to have my brain catch up here, and I think it finally has. So I believe that the answer is that the bill yesterday really focused. It's interesting. Sexual exploitation, sex trafficking have the word sex, and there's crime in it, of course. It is a crime. But in a way, the statutes are somewhat separate from one another. And I believe that the bill we heard yesterday really focuses on the CSC, or criminal sexual conduct statutes. And this is really focusing on the prostitution and sex trafficking statutes. And they are next to one another. There's a connection. I will point out as a prosecutor that I actually think of sex trafficking exploitation as sometimes looking a lot more like domestic violence and sexual violence if you had to choose. There's a lot to unpack on that. We can get into it. But in any case, so I don't see that there's a conflict. The main thing is that there was a revamp of the CSC statutes that we heard yesterday, and that's terrific. At some point, we will need probably a revamping of the prostitution and sex trafficking statutes. There's a lot to discuss about that. You and I have talked, I think, offline, Representative O'Neill, about some people desiring to make some really substantial changes there. So at some point, we'll have to do that. But this is really making changes to those statutes, and I don't see a conflict between the two at all.
Great questions. Much work for us to do. Representative Raleigh.
Chair, line 1.14 of this bill says in the conviction side that a conviction by any court in Minnesota or another jurisdiction, and then later on 3.27, it says that there is this is new language inserted, whoever violates provisions, and it goes forward and says within 10 years is guilty of a felony. And I would like to ask the author, how does that vehicle work to bring in other jurisdictions? I mean, does this make it, can we bring in federal cases like somebody was convicted in Iowa and then it brings it into Minnesota? Will that help us to give a stiffer penalty by going to a felony? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Raleigh. So, right, so if you look at line 3.28, as you pointed out, the reference is to the term conviction, so within 10 years of a previous conviction. And that applies in Minnesota law, but that word conviction has this special meaning that, as you pointed out, it's actually a meaning that isn't changed under this bill. And under current law, the term conviction means a conviction in Minnesota or any other jurisdiction. So if it's in Iowa, if it's in federal court in Iowa, which is actually even a different jurisdiction than state court in Iowa. So yep, because of that word conviction that is already defined under Minnesota law, doesn't matter where it is, the same change applies.
Oh, very good to highlight that for the public here, Representative Raleigh. Representative Johnson.
Chair Mariani, Representative Pinto, and thank you for this bill. It is something I actually really agree with. We need to put a stop to this. It's devastating to women and those involved, especially the women. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's teenagers. We need to do everything we can to stop this. The question I have is, I don't know if you recall or not, last biennium, Representative Runbeck had a bill, and it was brought up by the one of the testifiers today that we have they're moving into massage parlors. Linda Runbeck had a bill to allow jurisdictions when people come in for licensing for their businesses and stuff to do a background check outside of Minnesota. Right now, they only can do it inside. And what we've learned is these groups are coming from out of state where they've been caught there, setting up massage parlors and other business in the state of Minnesota to further their sex trafficking businesses here, because we cannot actually look in other jurisdictions outside the state to see if they've had these convictions or had issues with that. So I'm in the process of, I just got started to get that bill rejacketed for this year, but I'm wondering if you'd take a look at that and possibly add this to this, so the local jurisdictions can actually see if somebody's setting up a business, whether it's a massage parlor or something else, has had sex trafficking issues in the past, so we can stop them from coming to our communities.
Representative Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Johnson, I'm very happy to talk with you about that. I should and potentially include that. I will note that very often folks in the massage business may not have had that prior conviction. So we should certainly look at that. I guess I would urge you in turn to look at House File 1275. I would love to have you as a co-author, which would provide for licensing of individual massage therapists, individuals doing this. As I've been working for years with a number of task forces trying to figure out what to do about this, and it seems to be the best approach to address the issue of massage therapists. County Attorney Kendall made references that there's more that we can do under current law, but I really do think we need licensure. So I'd urge you in turn to take a look at House File 1275, but very happy to talk with you about the Runbeck proposal and see what we can do.
Very well. Thank you, Representative Pinto. Thank you, Representative Johnson. Members, good, strong conversation. The Representative Pinto, your motion will be to lay this over. So we'll consider it in our omnibus finance bill. I do want all who are tuning in and participating to know that that is not by any means the end of this bill. This conversation will certainly continue. I particularly want to thank the trafficking task force in central Minnesota. It's not the first time that we've heard from these good public servants. And I just, the work that you're doing is just so incredibly valuable, for our state, not only in terms of your direct intervention in the lives of people in your part of the state, but also in terms of how it informs us, for modifying, adjusting, modernizing our legal statutory approaches to ending this horrible crime. So thank you so much for all of you for being with us here today. Representative Pinto, the chair will lay over House File 613.